I'd like to start the program and welcome all of our members. If you are not a member and would like to become a member, please chat with our board members. I believe Johanna Ellis and Sandy Desmond in the back would be happy to help you. My name is Dr. Greg DiNicola, President of the Laguna Beach Historical Society. If you don't think you want to be a member, but you'd like to make a donation to help us defray some of the costs of this evening, there's a little donation basket where Sandy is in the back. Before I introduce our speaker, I did want to kind of bring up a historical thing going on in town. If you're a local, you know that there's been the announcement that the local theater has closed. And I guess based on my position in the Historical Society, I've gotten many, sometimes dozens of communications a day asking what's the latest on the theater and is it going to be torn down. And there's a lot of rumors. As far as I can tell, none of the rumors have any fact at all. I heard a rumor that the nice lady who owns it would gonna sell it to a millionaire in town. I don't think there's any proof of that. I've heard rumors that they want to make it into a club like the Golden Bear or the White House used to be. I'm not sure there's any facts to support that either. The only fact I've heard that probably makes sense is that she has received so many communications on people wanting to get their hands on it that she's deferring all calls to John Pedig, our city manager. That probably is true. So if you have any interest in following this along, and if you want to help support whatever happens to the theater, there's a Facebook page called Friends of Laguna Theater, right? And so that's something you might want to consider joining. If you are interested, we'll keep close tabs as your historical society, and you might want to read our next newsletter because I'm sure there'll be an article about it. And the way you would get the newsletter is to become a member, as I said before, so you might want to join tonight. And if you don't want to join tonight but you want to keep up, you might become a friend on our Facebook page because we will be updating things there, or you might want to bookmark our website because we'll be updating you there. And if you don't want to do any of those things, please come next month to our next program where I will update you from this podium. We have credit cards too. In 1 month, give or take, October 27th, we will have a program on our lifeguards, and I think that's going to be a fantastic program. That's Carrie Weiser doing that. And then 1 month after that, on November 24th, Phil Brigandi will be discussing Joe Thurston's book, Laguna Beach of Early Days. Both of those sound like a lot of fun. So we give these talks about the history of Laguna, and tonight we go way back in history. So far it's prehistory. You may know the story of Howard Wilson. Somebody want to tell me who Harold Wilson is? Harold Wilson was a 17-year-old in 1933. He was excavating on St. Anne's Drive on some construction site, and he found a human skull. Probably goes in much more detail, but I won't go into that right now. At the behest of none other than Dr. Louis Leakey, it was sent to UCLA, and it was radiocarbon dated, and it was over 17,000 years old. I wrote it down, 17,150 to be exact. At the time, that was the oldest human bones found in North America, so we really hit the map. Since then, time and new technology and anthropology has kind of eroded support in that, and the so-called Laguna woman, as it was called, and I hear now it's down to maybe a mere 11,000 years old. So it did have some controversy. So to find out more about this controversy and other interesting archaeologic facts about Laguna Beach, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. She is a registered professional archaeologist and a trained paleontologist. Would anybody like to volunteer the difference between an archaeologist and a paleontologist? I believe an archaeologist would study prehistoric people and cultures, and a paleontologist would study the fossils or bones or whatever. Animals. She is truly a local, born and raised right here in Laguna Beach. She went to UCLA for her BA in anthropology, and then to Cal State Fullerton for a master's in anthropology and archaeology. And her focus was on Southern California. In fact, her thesis focused on the archaeology of our own city here. She has worked as an assistant archaeological curator at John D. Cooper Center in Santa Ana, and she now works as archaeologist and GIS technician at Cogstone Resource Management in Orange. So to hear about Laguna prehistoric times, please assist me in giving a warm Laguna Beach Historical Society welcome to Ms. Megan Wilson.
Oh, is this on? Is it on?
It is now.
It's on now. Okay, I'll turn this on. Well, thank you. If you don't mind, I'm going to sit. Gravity is currently not on my side. I'm very happy to be here. It's not many times I get to nerd out on Laguna Beach archaeology, and obviously I'm interested because it's my hometown. I went to El Morro and just had that view my whole life, and then Thurston, another amazing view, even the high school. So it's interesting, though, when I was going to college, I didn't think Laguna Beach or even California was on my register, but it wasn't until graduate school that I realized that I should probably stick to where I'm from, because I thought I was going to go to Mexico, and a field school took me to Chile in South America, and the Chileans have a very good handle on their own archaeology. So it was an interesting situation as an American going to someone else's country, like, oh, we're going to do archaeology, because their idea was like, no, we got it handled. And I met this one guy, and he was just so in. This was on the Chilean coast, and it was, he hung out at the beach, a total surfer guy, and he was so passionate about his own history and prehistory. I was like, I totally connected with the guy. I'm like, why don't I do that too? Why not Laguna Beach stuff? So that's kind of how it happened. My first dreams were Mesoamerica. So we're going to paint really broad brushstrokes, if you will. I'm going to give you a crash course, everything you need to know about Laguna Beach archaeology, starting from the beginning. So just to give you a quick overview, we're going to talk about the peopling of the New World. And I don't know what you guys have learned, but again, it wasn't even until graduate school that I learned a new paradigm, if you will, which is the Pacific Coast Route. We'll talk about that. Talk a little bit about what I did with my thesis, because it's a good case study about Southern California subsistence and settlement patterns. We'll have a little fun with the original Laguna Beach locals and the original tourists. And then we'll talk about some really cool sites in Laguna Beach. So first, to start with the peopling of Americas, I don't know if you guys can reflect or go back to school and how we were all taught, but it's usually, the Bering Land Bridge, Beringia, and I always remember my teachers paint, with their hand in the map, and they're swirling down, and they go through Alaska, and they come down North America, and they curly Q through Mexico, and then just, stab South America. That's how it happened. And that's, and that's the Clovis first theory, and that is, so you're thinking big game hunters. So it's just some pictures of the megafauna, the mammoth, the mastodon. My favorite is the giant ground sloth. And this theory is true, but this, it's been, I'll save it till later and save my bias. But there's another theory that has been gaining steam that can account for really, really early sites in North America, because we'll go through some of the dates. So there it is. It's a two-part thing. It's Beringia. So all the water was locked up in ice sheets. So in between Alaska and North America, there was a land mass, but also an ice-free corridor. So, and the timing of those two weren't, you had Beringia, but then the ice-free corridor weren't perfectly matched up until about 10,000 years ago. And so some of the images on the right-hand side, that's from Simon Fraser. If you want more, Simon Fraser Museum in British Columbia, they have a really cool website that you can go for pictures and stories about the what we call the terrestrial entry into the New World. And so Clovis first, there's The map will show you, and it's all based on artifacts because there's no human remains from this time period. But what there is are these enigmatic points, and they're called the Clovis Point, and they have this big flute or a large, I guess, how could I explain it? A gash in the middle where they would be hafted onto a spear. And so these were big, I put the image of the guy holding it to show you how big they were. So these were for spear throwers. They were using an atlatl, which is I don't know if you guys all know, but it's like an extension of your arm, and it helps you just chuck it really hard. And so they're big points. They're hunting big game animals, and that's not negotiated. What is questioned is, was this what brought the earliest people to the New World? And I just, it's not really talked about, but Clovis and Laguna, yes, there is. A really cool find is, I'm going to go to my notes so I can give you more specific dates. But there was a Clovis Point, so we'll go back to these. And you can look at the distribution. It's primarily on the East Coast, but you see a little spot in Central California. And these maps are pretty bad because it doesn't show what's going on in Mexico. There was lots of Clovis sites there. But we have our very own Clovis site, and it's got a cool story. So it was found in Crystal Cove State Park, and it was by a local there's a local guy, Ron Sizemore, and I had to look him up when I was doing my thesis. He's an old school surfer guy, and he seems really cool. He seems like a person I want to know. I don't know if any of you guys know him, but I tried looking him up to talk to questions. So maybe you can come talk to me, because I would love to. When I was working at the Cooper Center, we would love to scan the point if he still has it and make a replica for teaching purposes, and we promise we'll give it back. We just anyway, so he was hiking along. He found it in 1981 on a fire brick road. From recent construction, and it's made out of chert, which is a typical lithic material or stone material that is used in California, especially in our area. And so it was written up, so the article, you can access it yourself. The authors are Fitzgerald and Rondeau, and one's a state park archaeologist. And if you want to look that up, the Society of California Archaeology, SCA, they have a journal, the Journal of California Archaeology. But this article is online. So these images are from that, and it gives you a map. I can't tell you exactly where it was found, because I would lose my RPA standing. But there's a drawing of the point. So we have our own claim to fame, and there's a couple. Were the Clovis people here hunting big game? They sure could have been. Another theory is maybe it was picked up by a local, a Native American at the time, and thought, oh, this is pretty cool, because a lot of times they would, find stone tools and they'd reuse them. So that's an interesting one. And then I want to show this image. This is done by a friend of the Cooper Center. Her name is Ann Hanbury. It's original art, so she did a lot of research. You guys, anyone want to guess where this scene could be in Laguna Beach? Yes, I'll give it away. So this is based on Laguna Lake, Barbara's Lake, and if you hike the area, if you go Crystal Cove, you can hike right over the ridge and to the lake. So we came up with this. We had an exhibit, and we're like, well, let's paint a picture of the likeliest place we would have a Clovis people in Orange County, and of course, why not Barbara's Lake, the only naturally occurring lake, and it was much bigger. And a dream, one of these days we'll core that lake and study the sediments and do a paleo environment reconstruction. Who knows what you find there, but yeah, so anyway, so this is a little rendition, and this is by Anne, and this is Laguna Beach, so kind of gets you in the mood. Another site, this is so this is Clovis in Malibu, and so this is this has an interesting story. Because much archaeology, how it's done is through mitigation. And so before you build anything, it's part of environmental protection laws. Cultural resources are a non-renewable resource. So just with any biological or paleontological fossils, archaeology is treated the same. And so this was a private home, and the person who owned the home wasn't very particularly happy to have archaeologists around, but she had to do it. And so during the course of monitoring, which is, again, what a lot of archaeology do, is we kind of stand there and we watch a backhoe excavator and just look at what they dump out and sift through it. And if we find something, we stop them, and they get real mad, but we're doing our job. So here's another Clovis point. This is Point Doom. So if you refer to the topography, it's just this very prominent landmass that sticks out. And this was actually found by the Native American Monitor, because a lot of times with archaeologists, there's also a Native American Monitor to make sure that their resources are not being neglected. So it's just cool that we have our own local Clovis points. So now I want to, with that said, I have a couple maps that is gonna, we'll talk about the Pacific coast, and I'm obviously very, very biased, and I won't even try to hide that because I feel very strongly about it. But so we have, there's a few very early sites that predate 10,000. So how do you explain 10,000, if 10,000 years ago was the sweet spot for the Clovis first of the people moving on land, how do you explain a site like Monte Verde in southern tip of Chile, and it dates, and it's accepted 14,500 years or before present. And so there's a little star, and you can see that inset map. It's not a very good one. It's not right there on the coast, but it was found in a very boggy, marshy area, and the things that came out of that site were just remarkable. And it was excavated by Tom Dillahay, and he just stumbled upon this, and this became his claim to fame. So let me just find my notes. So it was excavated in 1977, and it's near, if you're familiar with Chile, the Puerto Montt. And what he was really smart, and he learned from previous, I guess, not mistakes, but things, because even Clovis, it was hard to establish that Clovis, that we had early man that early. There was people, the mindset was like, oh no, that's way too early. They came much later in time. So what he did is he found it, and then he invited all the Paleo-Indian archaeologists. He said, hey, come check out this site. And they saw for themselves, and that's what really helped gain acceptance. So it has a series of 11 confirmed radiocarbon dates, unquestionable human-made lithic artifacts, those projectile points and groove spears, which are for fishing. Bones, there was wood tent remains, like the pegs were still in the boggy ground, preserved because it was so wet. Animal skin, they found clay, there's weaved seaweed, and preserved footprints. It was just a really neat site, and so this is the smoking gun, if you will, for pre-Clovis, but it hadn't been established about the Pacific Coast route. But this was the thorn in the side, and it's funny when we talk about it, we talk about the Clovis Mafia, because you get these ideas and people are really hesitant to accept a new theory. So now we're gonna move to the Pacific Coast route, and this was first, I guess, theorized by a guy named Newt Fladmark, and he was in British Columbia. And this is 1979 he proposed his theory, or 1976, 1979. So he had this idea that people came along the coast. And one of the big reasons why no one assumed that the coast was even plausible is no one's found a boat. That's a big one, but it's kind of unfair. And everyone assumed that the ice sheets went all the way to the coast, which through a lot of reconstructions of the paleo environment, geographers and geologists have found that the coasts were unglaciated, the islands were unglaciated. So there are these areas where people could skip a boat along, and so that's where the data came from first. And other people did these really cool research along the islands of Canada, and they kind of mapped the seafloor, and it showed where ancient rivers were, and just the topography. It was, you could tell it was once on land. So he proposed that. It got no steam. It was kind of very peripheral. And then this guy, John Erlandson, who's still working at, I believe it's Santa Barbara, He's a professor there. But he came up with a kelp highway hypothesis. And so he made his argument was that, the kelp forests were just this continuous megapatch of resources that if you knew how to utilize the kelp forest, you could just follow that all the way down, theoretically to the tip of Chile. The only part where it doesn't grow is the equator. It's too warm. So the image on the left shows the Pacific Coast distribution, and then on the right is just the world distribution of kelp. And it's also hard to envision it, too, because our kelp forests are so different than what they would have been, especially in Southern California, especially where we are, because the Russians had overhunted the sea otters, and the sea otters ate the sea urchins, and the sea urchins eat the holdfast of the kelp, and so now our kelp is dying because there's an infestation of sea urchins. So, and gosh, I would love to be able to see little sea otters just like we see sea lions now. But yeah, so according to this, 16,000 years ago, the coast was nearly unobstructed. So that is the argument for that one. And there's some other theories of people coming from Europe. Along the other side, if you can think of the Vikings, how they came to Newfoundland, how they made their way here. That's the Solutrean hypothesis, and they compare the Paleolithic points in Europe to the Clovis points. And then there's another one where they came, if you will, from Africa to South America. And one of the arguments for that is that if you recall the Olmec heads, the giant colossal heads, they look African. But those two are, there's not much evidence. And for the Pacific Coast hypothesis, there's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of early human sites on the islands. There's a lot of early human sites along the coast as well. And you also have to keep in mind that the earliest sites are all underwater because of sea level rise. So that's that. I don't know. Take it or leave it if you like. We can talk about it more if you're interested, but a couple things if you guys want to pursue it further. I'm going to go now to the next topic, and I want to talk about settlement and subsistence patterns, which is basically where people lived, what they ate. And this is what I did for my thesis. And so I used the Aliso Creek watershed, and I really, my first option was I wanted to do Laguna Canyon or the San Diego Creek, but there's a number of reasons why I didn't choose that, and just the nature of how archaeology, again, is done. The environmental protection laws weren't implemented until the 70s. This is NEPA in CEQA. So unfortunately, there was a lot of development in Laguna Canyon before the 70s, as we obviously all here know. And not to mention, it was very trotted on historically. There was an old stagecoach route that went through there. So, okay, that one wasn't good. But the Aliso Creek was really good because this was post-World War II boom. Really, the 60s and 70s is when it was developed. So the idea was all these sites should be recorded under NEPA and CEQA. So I chose that. That was my boundary. In green is I guess a hydrologist, that's the watershed. So I just pretty much mapped all the sites. I had access, when you want to look up archaeological sites, you have to go to California Historical Information Center, Chris. And it happened to be the reason why I chose Cal State Fullerton is because it was on the campus. So I pretty much camped there for 2 months and just recorded all of the sites. I'm sorry you can't really see the legend, but we'll talk about some of the interesting sites. And I just had to put some neat pictures. The one on the bottom is actually from a local guy, Steve Turnbull. I don't know, is he here? I went to school with his daughter, Kelly. He has an awesome blog. It's like lightheaded. But if you want to look more Laguna Beach stuff, I really highly recommend it. And I thought it was neat. You can see the mouth of Aliso Creek down there, and those palm trees are totally fake. It was a ploy for people to come buy property. And it predates, you can't even see the Coast Highway, which was the old Coast Trail, which was originally a Native American trail. There's a saying that all the European settlers had either two things in front of them, an Indian trail or a Native American themselves. So again, settlement patterns. This is, what people are eating, and again, you can't probably read that, but that is a seasonal round that someone did based on some studies they did in Liso Creek, and it has, just real briefly, like we're approaching right now acorn season, so if you go hiking, you can notice that all the acorns are ripe, so this would be the time that Native Americans would harvest acorns. In the winter was migratory birds. The summer, pretty much, it was schooling fish. In the spring is when seeds were ripe. And they have really cool names, like the translated name is, November was big whistling month. And I think we can all respect that, Santa Ana winds. And winter was the little fat padded month to reflect the, I'm skipping the word, the prickly pear cactus, because you can eat that. And anyway, and then why? So where were people living? What were they eating? What were they doing? Why were they moving? And people in our area were very nomadic, so they would spend the winters along the coast and then go up into the foothills in the summer. I think I got that backwards. They spent their winters on the coast. Yes, and their summers in the... I'm gonna stick to my notes. So, anyway, so our chronology and the way archaeologists in Orange County, it's different everywhere. If you go to Santa Barbara, they go by paleocoastal, early, middle, late. Here we do paleocoastal, milling stone, intermediate, late prehistoric, and then historic. And historic is pretty much when they found the founding of San Juan Capistrano. You could put in another area, the proto-historic, when the Spanish and Native Americans were kind of finding their way with each other. And if you wanted to translate it into BC, you just subtract 2,000 from that. So 6,000 BC, if it's easier. And the milling stone, just to touch on that real quick, if you come up and look at the artifacts, there's a very unique artifact to Orange County. It spills a little bit into LA County and San Diego County, and it goes up into the foothills, but it's called the cogstone, and I don't know why it slipped my mind to put a picture of a cogstone up, but you can see them. There's two. One is actually from Laguna Beach, and then there's some more images on a pamphlet for the Cooper Center. But it's unique to our area, and it dates to the milling stone. It's a very early artifact. It has, no archaeologists, no Native Americans, everyone has their ideas, but there's no consensus on what this artifact was used for. It has no use-where, and it's about the size of your hand. They call it a cogstone, like a cogged wheel. Some of them have a hole through the center. Some look almost like a fish vertebrae. If you go to the Bowers Museum, on their display case, they have some really cool ones, but they say it was, marine life effigies. But the truth is no one knows. We only know that they date to the milling stone period. And in archaeology, if you don't know what it was used for, it becomes ceremonial. So it's ceremonial. But they're really neat. They're found in caches. Bolsa Chica is called the cogstone site. They found hundreds of cogstones. The one that is in the Cooper Center collection, or just one of them, but the one I like here, it was the director has a friend who lives in Laguna, and he had this sitting in his garage. And was like, hey, Jerry, I got this artifact, and, we brought it over, and we're like, oh my God, it's a cogstone. And so he just donated, and it's just a trip, but they're found primarily on the coast, but in the foothills. But it wouldn't do me any justice if I didn't mention cogstone. But those are early 8,000 BP to 300 BP. So this is just horrible because it's so small. But it pretty much, it goes through correlates the time periods with the environment. That's one thing I looked at my thesis. So paleocoastal, this is post-glacial, so it was cold. The coast, even down here, had redwood trees. It was a very different environment. And the milling stone, oak trees started replacing the evergreens. And then in the intermediate or late milling stone, the chaparral, the sages, they started getting established. In the intermediate period and the early late prehistoric, it was very dry and very hot. And when we'll look at the sites in relation to the time periods, there was very few sites, and any sites they're tied to water sources. So I was really interested in that. One of the periods is the MCA, 8900 to 1300. Just very dry. There's not a lot of sites to account for this period. And, California's gone through in and out of drought, but this was another drought period. And then another paleo-environmental time period was the Little Ice Age, which is 1400 to 1800. And if you think about it, that's when the Europeans came. So this was a cooler, wetter, kind of golden time where, the Spaniards, they talk about this like perfect environment. But, they came in when it was good and wet, and then they established all their cattle ranches. Then if you recall, about 1860 and 1900s, they experienced a whole drought, and all their cattle started dying off, and they switched to sheep. And then because the Mexican ranchos, between drought and losing the war, got all bought up by Anglos. So it's interesting. So that's what I looked at in my thesis, how the environment may have had an impact on settlement and subsistence patterns. And it did change the way they eat in the late period. Is when Native Americans all over California started using acorns heavily. Acorns was a staple food before. It was more seed-based in, I guess you could say, big game and fishing. So it changed what they ate, changed where they lived. I could go in about talking about a new language group, a new biological group, but that's a little beyond the scope. So here's there's the image of all the sites again, and the graphs on the right is early in time, on the left is recent in time. So the graph on top is all the dates, or the recorded dates from the Aliso Creek, and then on the bottom is a graph by Hank Corper, who is like Orange County guy, archaeology, and he did all the recorded sites in Orange County. And you can see that the pattern is similar. So a lot of times, one way of estimating population is you go by radiocarbon dates, which I don't think is the greatest way to do it, because if you don't find the sites, you don't have a date for them, or if the dates aren't good. But that's just one way to do it. And you can see if more radiocarbon dates, more population. So that's what that is. And so there's all the sites. Remember it. We're gonna go. Now these maps will reflect the time period. So Millingstone, we're early. This is the Cogstone period. So if you look at the distribution so this is Aliso Creek. Obviously, Aliso Creek Beach would be at the mouth. And then the top is the Santa Ana foothills. So this represents a pretty even going up to the foothills and then going down to the coast, but based on the sites, it didn't seem like they spent too much time on the coast. But then again, all those sites would have been underwater. You can see one dot, it's the circle, it's just, sorry, this map is just no justice. But it's 8, OR 8, that's Goff's Island. Keep that, it's currently where the Montage was, previously where Treasure Island was. And that's a really interesting site, but that was, it's one of our earliest sites in the area. And if you can see up on top, you can't see the numbers, but the 600s, it's almost like a creek. There was a spring that was there, and that fed into the main Aliso Creek, and that dried up. And then so you have all these sites, but there's no water there. All the sites were on, Native Americans like to pick ridge tops and knolls. And so they were probably usually processing seeds, going down south to get Mytilus shell, or Mytilus mussels. And then here's the intermediate. So we can look lots of sites. Oh no, not that one. So Millingstone, a lot of sites, but that also accounts for they're very nomadic. So they wouldn't go to the same spot each time. They might be in the same area. But then the intermediate's like, what is going on? Where are all the sites? It's not like people disappeared. Where did they go? And Millingstone, we had the water supply was still good. these ephemeral tributaries, they were probably more reliable. But yeah, we go to the intermediate, there's not a lot of sites. It could be lack of dating. But whatever sites there are, they are right on top of the creek itself. And then the ones, if you can see in the center, you're like, why are those floating around? There's a spring there. Those were there also in the milling stone. So there's a spring. And then all these other sites near the spring, the convergence of Sulphur Creek and Aliso Creek, there's quite a number of springs there. So it would, I argued in my thesis that during this period of really dry weather, that they were on top of the water sources and they just probably consolidated. They weren't able to spread out like they were before. And they probably had to keep a cap on population. They couldn't, probably wasn't the best idea to have too many kids in a time where you couldn't feed them. But there's ORA, it's still there. Our main areas are still there. And then we'll go to late prehistoric. And just a side note, if you look at the Tustin Plain, that just the center, you say there's never really any sites there. And that is because that was just a giant marsh. Marshy, muddy area. Spaniards call it Ciénaga de las Ranas, or the Swamp of the Frogs. So you wouldn't want to live there. It was too wet. And then, we drained that out pretty good. And so that's what's there. And so here's late prehistoric. And you can tell all the sites are now down at the south. It's kind of like they bailed on the foothills. And again, there's really reliable water sources. What's interesting too is this is where you see all the rock shelters or caves being occupied. They weren't really occupied in the milling stone. Started getting occupied in the intermediate, but in the late prehistoric, they were using those a lot. And one idea is that it was for people just visiting to the coast, because people became a little bit more sedentary. So maybe caves were a good place, so you didn't have to put up your tule, your hatched house. You can just hang out in a cave. And that was okay, because it's really hard to get in and out of those steep areas. And then this is another painting by Anne Hanbury. So the first one was our Paleo-Indians, Clovis. And this is a late prehistoric, a scene, if you will. And she did a lot of research, and she's just so talented. But you can see what I was talking about, the tule reed houses. I really like that she included the boys playing the hoop game, practicing their spear throwing. They even had the little native dog that was native to our area, but not anymore, kind of a little bit bigger than a Chihuahua. And then the ladies, pounding acorn, and the young girls tending to the babies, and it's just a really pretty picture. So now I know that probably wasn't the most interesting part of the talk, but now we'll talk about locals and tourists. So that first, I kind of went in an order of pre-European. That painting is done on the Bayona, which is in LA, and that shows a really neat marshland, people harvesting the tule reeds to make their homes, and people coming back from the hunt. Another, we'll get to it, but the Portola expedition, they started in San Diego, and the image on the top right is, a very unsuccessful attempt at baptism. This is what they don't teach you, or I was not taught in school. And we were always taught about the Eastern Native Americans, never taught about our local Native Americans, which I know has changed, but it paints a very different picture than from what I was taught. And it was until, again, college that I learned it was a very different situation. Bottom left is depicting the Padres in the first baptism in California, Christian. And if you ever drive on the 5, you see Christianitos, that canyon. That's where this happened. It was the Padres baptized 2 little Native Americans, and that was the first baptism in California. And so Christianitos is little Christians. So that was a successful attempt. And then you can see on the bottom right is what happened is the Native Americans mining the lime from Pecten Reef, which is located in Laguna Hills, because they're the ones that built the missions, and not always their choice, but it's kind of what happened. And what's really cool, if you look at the the new chapel in San Juan, the one that crumbled from the earthquake, you can see fossils of shells in the stone, which is cool. And they mine that from pectin reef, but they also use it. They would mine it, they would burn it, and use it for plaster. Kind of shows the demise of the Native Americans at the Europeans' hands. So I want to talk about the First Nations of our area, and it's an interesting story. So there's two groups. The Hashiman Nation, which is actually a subgroup of the Luiseno, but they're very geographically specific, and their border is actually, I can't think of the creek it's pretty much near San Onofre, if not San Onofre, and Aliso Creek. So Corper, he was an anthropologist from, is it Berkeley? I always forget. But he mapped all the tribes, and so that's what the Hashiman, it was a subgroup of the Luiseno. They spoke a Otahic language. They're also now known as the Weneno Band of Mission Indians. All the Native Americans will have what they had called themselves. Weneno, obviously the San Juan, and then Gabrielino, San Gabriel, so the people of those particular groups. The Hashiman are still very active, and they're very much alive. I put some of the woodcut drawings is from, this really cool, what was her name? Jean Goodwin Ames. She was part of the WPA arts program, and she did a lot of these prints for Boscana's writings about the Hashiman people. And this is one of their gods. This is Chichininchik in Ascending to the Stars, but they used that in a very similar image for their seal. And I can tell you they're alive and well and very active, because part of what I do at my job every day is we consult with the Native Americans when we have projects. And anytime we have a project, we do a record search, we do a sacred lands file search, and we have to send a letter up to the Native American Heritage Commission in Sacramento and show them our project area and some other details, and then they send us a list of all the Native American groups or organizations that we have to contact. And it all depends on where the project is located. And so if it's, say if it was in Laguna or anywhere near, there would be the Hashiman, and there's a lot of sects, they're not, for different reasons, there's different subsects of the group. So I only found one good logo, but I can promise you they are around, and I'll give you some more information about a couple of events coming up, and they're very nice, and not all of them like archaeologists. And on the top is Miyu, if you guys want to learn. That's kind of hello, thank you, if you think Miyu, but that's how you say it in Luiseno, so Miyu. And then there's the Tongva Nation, also known as the Gabrielino, from San Gabriel Mission Indians. And they have a much more, segmented tribes. They also spoke the Otahic language. And again, so these are everyone north of the Aliso Creek, if you will, pretty much up into Ventura. And then after Ventura, it's Chumash territory. And the Chumash, they are cool culture, and they are very active. If you've ever been to Wishtoyo, which is in Malibu, they have a whole Native American village. They do really cool things. Anyway, but so here's some of their tribes. Some of them are Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians, some of the Gabrielino Tongva tribe, the Gabrielino Quiche Nation. And they're, again, a very active group, and we definitely have to consult with them, and they always have a lot to say. And I put the image of Toyparina. I don't know if you've ever heard of this story, but go buy this book or go look it up. It's an amazing story of a Gabrielino. She was a leader. She was also a spiritual leader, but she started an uprising against the mission. She was pretty much snitched on by one of her own people, and she was tried, and all this is documented. And it's a really neat story, and it's a really good role model. They call the Joan of Arc of California. But I just, this is the things. There's even a play you can go see. But this is what I wish they would teach everyone, all the fourth graders in our schools. I wish this is what I learned about.
instead of a really bad story of Thanksgiving. So there's a little picture of the Hashiman in yellow, or the Wenenyo, and then where the Gabulenyo are, and then Luisenyo, the Hashiman are part of. Out in the desert, Cahuilla, there's the Cupeño, Digüeño, and if you ever wondered, why some tribes have, I guess, casinos, those are federally recognized tribes. So the federal government recognizes them as a sovereign nation. So there's different land rights, they have reservations. Fortunately, the Wenenyo and Gabulenyo, the missions were very effective on doing what they wanted to do, which was convert them and kind of assimilate them into Western European ways. And they're so factioned that they can't quite agree on how they can get federally recognized, and they're working really hard on it. And they're getting close, and I hope they do it. But so if you ever wondered, Cahuilla, or the Luisenyo tribes, that's Paula, Morongo, they're doing very well. And when I consult with those tribes, they have lawyers. It is a whole nother ball game. It's considered government-to-government consultation. Sometimes I can't even do it. There's different ways to do it, but it's really interesting. I really like doing it. But this little map just kind of shows you, very arbitrary. This is, just kind of gives you a general idea. Which will bring us to Laguna Beach's first tourists. And some of these images, Laguna Hills Community Center is really neat. I was talking about Pectin Reef. They also have a park called Dinosaur Park. If you have grandkids in town, oh my gosh, if they like dinosaurs. They've kind of kept with the theme, and there's cool little excavator things in the sand, and you can go in there and they have artifacts, they have fossils, and they also have these really great murals. And so that big one is, this is the Portola expedition discovering Orange County. But the first European to come, I guess you could say, north of Baja California, was Cabrillo. And that little image with the ship is a representation of Santa Barbara, of probably the Chumash and their plank canoes, which are beautiful, amazing. I could talk for 2 months about plank canoes. The Tongva had them too. They call them tiats, though. So it shows the Native Americans coming to say, hey, what's going on, Cabrillo? What are you doing? And he made landfall in Catalina. He described a couple, he described a very interesting ceremony where they buried with crows. And so a lot of what we know is from these historical accounts. And he made it, I think, went to Monterey, and somewhere along the line he busted his leg and died from that injury. But Cabrillo, 1542, was the first, and he came on ship. But it really wasn't until Portola, the Portola expedition, which pretty much follows very well the Portola, the road. He came in, and let me. I just want, so I can get my my facts straight. Let's see. Yeah, his assignment was to seek out the legendary Bay of Monterey to secure Spanish claim to the vast frontier. With a company that numbered 63, included 26 soldiers, 15 Baja California Indians, 2 missionaries, and 7 muleteers to care for their 100 mules. So yeah, and then with, who was with Portola was Junipero Serra, named after the street, who helped. He was one of the guys who baptized the Christianitos in San Diego, founded Mission San Juan. This is a picture of him when he was a little younger, because I just didn't have the heart of putting him next to Boscano, with both very stern religious faces. He was a little bit more chipper in this picture, but Junipero Serra, he established most of the missions, and these were, the Franciscans, and so, and then Boscana was the one who wrote the book about the Hashiman, and it's a really rare account. He went into a lot of detail about their customs, how they got, how they married, how they brought their kids up, what they ate, what they did. It's pretty good. It's very biased. You read it, and he keeps talking about how these poor heathens are toiling away and they don't know God, and But he did write down what they did. It's very biased. You kind of have to dig through the ethnocentrism, but it's good. It's a good read, and you can find that book and read it for yourself and learn a lot. So these are, and I call them tourists. They obviously weren't tourists, but the guys who were with Portola, they founded a lot of the ranchos that came after them. So here's a map of the Spanish and Mexican ranchos. Laguna Beach was kind of on the cusp of Rancho San Joaquin and the lands that belong to San Juan Mission, if you see in gray. And then next to is Rancho Niguel, which is interesting because it actually comes from a Native American word, Niguil, which was a settlement. So yeah, and man, I can't get over that I think it was Bigsby and Irvine. I think it was first bought by Moulton. I can't remember. I'll look at my notes. But getting Rancho San Joaquin, man, what a real estate venture that was, because they are just making so much money off of that land. I could break down, let's see. Let me see if I can find the actual. So yeah, Rancho Niguel was acquired by Lewis Moulton. Rancho San Joaquin by James Irvine and Benjamin Flint, Thomas Flint and Bigsby, and then Irvine eventually bought them all out and just killed it in the real estate. Trabuco, Portola de los Pinos was James L. Flood and Jerome O'Neill, but now we all know O'Neill. And then the Whiting Ranch. So yeah, and ultimately what happened is the Spanish ranchos, they had their cattle businesses. Then that big drought came along, and cattle didn't work, so a lot of them went to sheep. But then they lost the war, and they more or less pretty much got pushed out of their land, and so they had to sell it off to Anglos. So those were the Anglos that bought them, and then yeah, man, post-World War II, Irvine, the mass, just from agriculture to a master plan community. That story is interesting. I don't know if you guys ever been to the Irvine Historical Society, or they have a lot of museums, but that's a trip of a story. And then some other people. So John P. Harrington was a guy who he studied languages, and he pretty much documented. We know everything we know about Native American languages from this guy. I just love this picture. This is in Santa Barbara, and this is Obispeño people, San Luis Obispo. And there he is sitting there. And he was a school teacher in Santa Ana, and he just made it so he would teach, I think, he was a language teacher. I don't know what that meant, but he would teach, and then on his days off, there's another cool picture of like a model for, just an old car, and he all packed up, and he'd go and record on these wax cylinders the language, and he wrote down a lot of the customs, and just the ethnographer, anthropologist, but not really, and he was a real quirky guy, and so we know a lot of what we know from him. More specific to Laguna Beach, I could not find a picture to save my life. I know there one exists of John Winterbourne, but this was part of the WPA, the New Deal, and the government hired a lot of archaeologists to do archaeology all over America, and so Winterbourne was kind of in charge of Southern California, and a lot of the sites in Laguna Beach, including Goff's Island, he excavated, and this was before all the laws. He excavated in the 30s and 40s, and Goff's Island's a trip because all the collections are gone. They're missing. No one knows kind of what happened to them. But so those are kind of our archaeologist people in our area. So now we'll talk about some fun stuff. We'll talk about some sites. So going off of Winterbourne, ORA 3, and so archaeological sites, they have like a name. Maybe they have like a fun name, but it's called the trinomial system. It's all used all throughout the country. So CA, the state, and then the county, and then the number in which it was founded. Historical sites have a different way. If it's a historical resource or if it's a historical building, it gets what we call a primary number, and those are way bigger, what we call a P number. But anything without a roof is considered historical, so that would get the trinomial and a P number. And these all get a P number, but anyway. So it was excavated in the 80s, so we'll go ORA 3 Smith Cliffs. It was called the Rock Reef site. Winterbourne was there. He noted it. He didn't do too much damage yet. So this is one of these, like, we call orphan sites, because a lot of times the sites get excavated through mitigation archaeology, and they get written up in a report that's called, we call gray literature, because it's not published, so the public, like you guys, have no access to it. You have to be a registered archaeologist to go and study these things, and because I was really into Laguna Beach archaeology, when I did my thesis, of course, I had my study area, and then I was like, and I'll just look at all the sites in Laguna too, because I wanted to know what was there. So I have all these records for my own nerding. So we got a little grant when I was at the Cooper Center, and we re-looked this site up. I thought it would be like, oh, we'll get some dates on it. Turned out it had 8 dates already. The report was just not very easy to get to. And so this dates 3,000, 5,000 years ago, and if you remember what we were talking about, this was an intermediate site. So this is when, where'd all the sites go? This was a site that was primarily occupied during the intermediate period. And this is the Smith Cliffs are now a monstrosity on top of it. So we didn't have the money to do the dates, so we sourced the obsidian. And so the obsidian came from the Coso Range and Glass Mountain in the Modoc Forest. And just really cool artifacts. A little steatite bowl. Steatite is soapstone, and it comes primarily from Catalina Island. So they were trading in the intermediate period. They had the boats, but we don't have the artifacts to prove it. But they were using the teots to go back and forth. And another group of sites that should be mentioned are the NCAP, the Newport Coast Archaeological Project. Basically, where what would you call that? Where the new Trader Joe's is. Yeah, just right above Crystal Cove. Because Crystal Cove has cool sites in and of itself. You can kind of lump ORA 3 into it. Like what would be in Emerald Bay is just boggles my mind. There's probably sites all over, but again, that was, people built their homes there so early, there's no record of what there is. There's some sites, but just not a lot. Anyway, so the NCAP, it was all excavated at one time. I remember I was going to, that's when I was at El Moro, and we had a family friend who was an archaeologist who kind of got me into the field. And he, would give me all these little tidbits, and he was also a cross-trained paleontologist, so he always told me they were looking for the whales with the legs, and I just, as a kid, it gave me, like, crazy thoughts, but they were looking for really, really early whales. And they excavated that all at one time, and one guy did it, and so just cool sites, and it just really, as opposed to one site here, and you kind of have to piece it together, they were able to do a really neat, paint a better picture, and it was milling stone to late prehistoric, but really in the late prehistoric, and just really cool things that came out of that. And that, I'll talk a little bit about the Pacific Coast Archaeological Society, but they do a good job at publishing some of this gray literature. But I could go on a tangent forever. We'll talk about Goff's Island. So this is Winterbourne again. He excavated this he did a pretty good job, but this was before radiocarbon dating, before standards were in place. So he was able to say that there was an early culture and a later culture, a large midden, and a midden is basically a prehistoric trash, a lot of shell. They found a house pit. There was a burial, lithics, which are stone tools, ground stone, which are monos, metates, mortar and pestle. But that collection's been lost. It was supposed to be at the Bowers. They don't have it. It just, you read the report and it just kills you because it kills you. If I ever do a PhD, I could do a PhD on that site alone. And then Goff's Island, it's really neat. But that used to be one continuous landmass, and that little island that sticks out, it has the same stratigraphy as it does on the mainland, which is kind of a neat thing. But now the montage is there. The Laguna Canyon, the sites around there, there is ORA 1055 that was found when they realigned the 133. And, this site was super cool. So this was we're talking I can't remember the exact number, but it was really deeply buried. Just think it probably got all washed. So luckily that preserved it from the old road and the old you call it, the Stagecoach Trail. But there are a bunch of hearth features, basically fire pits, fire rings, numerous, like I think maybe 20, all over the place. There was one human burial that they capped, which means they poured cement over it and left it where it was, which is one way to conserve it as opposed to digging it up, putting it in a box, and someone forgetting about it. Lots of lithics, a lot of shell. They're bringing shell out. A cool cache of monos. There's like a collection of monos, which are hand stones that you use to grind seeds. So someone had their choice monos and they hit it. So when they go up in the foothills, and when they came back, they would have this. There's a dog burial, which is a very Juaneño, Luiseño, Hashiman thing to do under a metate, which is the nether stone, or you have your mono and you grind the seeds. And the dog, I wish people would do more studies on our little local dogs. They're really cute little guys. Similar to a Chihuahua, a little bit bigger, but the burials are very common. They're very loved, these animals. And again, this was dated to the intermediate period, so it goes with my argument, my thesis, which I like, a good, reliable source of water. Am I going right? The only naturally occurring lake. So you would think if you did a survey around that lake, there'd be sites all over. A dream is to core that lake, do a paleo environment reconstruction, and it has so much potential, but you need money, and I don't have that. And poor Bubbles, you guys all know the story of Bubbles Lake. I don't know who Barbara or who she was. I'm sure she was fantastic, but it's always going to be Bubbles Lake to me. But I guess that's why they realigned. I was always told that's why they realigned the canyon, is to help the lake out. But I don't know, that toll road, that was a good story for them. So now we'll talk about Laguna Woman. So this is, Steve Turnbull has the coolest blog, and he has like the best info. I actually got the picture of the skull. If you want to know more about the Laguna Woman or all things Laguna Beach history, even his wife has been published in some old, history of Orange County books. Check that website, or check his blog out. It's really good. So it's on St. Anne's. Again, I can't be very specific, but the site extended from Glen Eyrie to the coast. So they found the human remains were a skull fragment and a tibia, but there's some argument they may not have been from the same person or the same individual. And it was Howard Wilson and Edward Hariner, and they heard rumors that these construction guys had found bones, and this is according to Steve Turnbull's blog, so I don't know how much of it is true. And so they went to go check it out, and sure enough, they found these bones and contacted people. I think it was in San Diego. So they dated it, and the date was 17,150, which is crazy. Like, if you got that date now, that would just be like, Monteverde, remember, 14,500. That would be 3,000 before. That would just, what? But it's exciting nonetheless. But they did the test with, it was amino acid test, and it wasn't very reliable. It has been redated, not the bones itself, because the bones where they are is still kind of in question where these remains are. But they dated shell, which is much more reliable when it comes to, because you can't, nowadays, you just can't radiocarbon date human remains. It's just not ethical. It would really make a lot of Native Americans very unhappy if it's like someone digging up your grandma and pulverizing her bones. So you just can't do it. But they did the shell from the layer above and below, and they got a date of 8,940, which is actually above, and then below, or it was switched, like the later date was on top, or the earlier date was on top and the later date was on bottom, of Mytilus, which is muscle. So that's kind of where that stands, but it's a cool story. Anytime I tell people I'm interested in Laguna Beach archaeology, they're like, oh, Laguna Woman, Laguna Man, should write a paper on that, and all that can be said has been said. But still really neat. There was again a big trash heap. And then just, if I could mention a couple historic sites. So CA Ore 13, which is, I think the Canyon, El Toro Road. So this is a really cool site. The petroglyphs, which are Native American markings on some boulders, bedrock mortars, which are, think of in a big piece of bedrock, like a little stone dish to mash up acorns. It was called the Laguna Springs adobe, and it was occupied by a Hispanic family of high socioeconomic status. You can tell that by the artifacts. Before that, or after that, was Enos French. I don't know if that name is familiar to anyone, but what I always got me, they call it Tischler Rock. Hyman Tischler, does anyone? I had to look, I guess he was some sort of businessman, but he carved in, remember H. Tischler, July 9, I should say 1860, not 1960. That wouldn't be that interesting. But that's just a cool site. It was an adobe. All the remains are gone. Yeah, so that's there. And then the one on the right, or a 873, those are wagon wheel ruts in bedrock. And that was a 2.5 kilometer trail from Temple Hills to the canyon. But I just thought that's so cool that they really used that. And if you've ever gone hiking in Aliso Creek and you look right up to where the TOW is, how they got up there is pretty fantastic. But that's a cool site. I can't give you the exact location, but go try and find it. There's a trowel to give you an idea of the size. And if you are interested at all, next weekend, the Aquarium of the Pacific, if you are interested in Native American activities, they're doing the Moopintam Festival. So they do singing, dancing, storytelling. It's really interesting if you want to learn a little bit more, see the Native Americans alive and well and very active yourself. I have a list for the John D. Cooper Center. October is actually Archaeology Month, so there's a big cool event October 10th from 10 to 3 if you want to go, if you have kids or grandkids. It's in Buena Park. It actually has a paleontology museum. That's from everything from geology, prehistory, history, archaeology. It's good stuff. And then the Pacific Coast Archaeological, I put center, but it's Pacific Coast Archaeological Society, PCAS. Second Thursday of every month at 7:30 at the Irvine Ranch Community District. They always have a speaker. And this is a cool group to be a part of. If you get a hold of their journal, you can search their journal. Some of them online is for free. I think it's the newer stuff. The older stuff, they have you buy the journal. But like I said, they publish the gray literature, so they publish very local things. So you can just go on their website, go on their journal, type in Laguna Beach, and who knows, you might find a site that was excavated where you live. And then there's also the Society of California Archaeology. They have a program called CSAP, or CASIP, and you can be an archaeological steward. Their annual meetings in Ontario, if you want to learn more about that. It's a very fun silent auction where everyone just gets very hammered and buys things they don't need. And that's it. I say thank you very much for listening. I went over a little bit.
Thank you, Megan, very, very much. Any questions for Megan?
Yeah.
Hold on 1 second for the mic because we're on TV.
Oh, gosh. I'm glad you reminded me now because I forgot about that.
I just would like you to clarify where the wagon trail went from
It was
where
from Temple Hills down to the canyon, the 133. So they were kind of going, how if you go up on, what is that park? Alta Laguna Park, and you can see into the canyon.
Yeah.
So if you think kind of along that route. But again, I can't give it away.
No, I know.
Become an archaeologist.
I just wanted to
Yeah.
know what the starting and ending point.
Yeah, and that was it's the Mexican Anglo period, so.
Would that connect back to where Dana Dips was?
I don't even know what's Dana Dips.
Well,
Oh,
Dana Dips is, if you go up Golden Lantern, now it's all houses, but back in the 60s and earlier, there was a road that ran along some old stagecoach tracks right behind there. There's houses all over them now.
oh yeah, no, this one I think went the opposite way because there was a stagecoach connection in Laguna Canyon that would take you to Santa Ana, and then.
And so the reason the road went into San Juan instead of coming up through South Laguna, is because they couldn't get the wagons across Aliso Creek. Can you truth to that?
Probably, yeah. I mean, where Aliso Creek is by the coast, it's very steep.
I believe that's why Laguna was bypassed for so long, is because they couldn't get the wagons across Aliso Creek.
Well, and that's a good
So
thing.
the road went inland in Santa Ana.
Oh, okay, I see.
And then also the Laguna lady, I believe her skull sat on a shelf for about 10 or 15 years.
It did. I got to relook the record, and there was a very interesting correspondence between. I can't remember the gentleman who wrote it, but it was reviewed by Howard Wilson. But it went through a lot of the drama about the person who dated it, and it was questioning his integrity, and he was like, who knows what could have happened? It's been sitting on the shelf, and they're pushing this person.
He was only
to
17
redate
years
it.
old. He didn't know what he had.
Oh, well, Howard Wilson, credit, not him, it was another person a scholar, if you will,
Yeah.
who had dated, and they were just very worried about his integrity, and so I guess they won, and they redated it, but that's that's the earliest human remains in our area, really. There's Upper Newport Back Bay, ORI 64, which is kind of the earliest site in our area. But that one, 775, compares to it, so. But no one ever talks about it. They always talk
There's
about
also a
Oregon.
great book on the Irvines that was printed about 1951 that goes back to the Indians and all that. It's pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, Irvine. Gosh, what a real estate. I just can't get over it.
And I think from what I've read, dated, is the state did the best they could for the land grants and tried as impartially as they could to divide the land up as it had been given out through land grants and that. But some of the landmarks were, the bush and the sandstone and the valley, so they're, pretty vague descriptions. But they did the best they could, I think, to
Yeah.
give the land out to whom it belonged, short of the Indians.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Just a note, I found out later that my dad was best friends with Mr. Wilson.
Oh, neat.
So that was kind of cool. Top of the World, what year was that about?
Top of the world when it was settled?
No, excavated or whatever, when you found,
Oh, you mean the wagon?
yeah.
Oh, that
it
was, that site wasn't recorded, I think, the 70s. Let me see.
So in the 70s.
Well, they recorded the site.
Oh, okay.
But let's see, it dates to the early Mexican, early Anglo, so that's, mid-1800s.
Oh, okay.
This is when people were taking their mules and wagons and
I-
trying to make a house up there.
My father built our home up on Top of the World in 1949, so we used to walk over in that area. I can't remember any details, but
Yeah, and
I think we saw things.
And that area was settled very early on. There's houses up there pretty early, which is pretty amazing to think about trekking up there without, park or, how do you get up there without Park Avenue?
We didn't.
Yeah.
We also didn't have water.
Yeah. Well, that's Aliso Creek was a good source of water. They barreled it up and brought it to everyone.
Park Avenue, that was the valley up there, just dead end.
Oh, yeah, I know. Thurston, what a weird place to put elementary school. Or a middle school. And they moved it on up.
The old newspapers talk about a collection that was made by the Murphy family. And I was wondering, I've always hoped that his collection got contributed somewhere. I was wondering if that name has ever come up anywhere. This would be, the newspaper articles talk about his collection in about 1915 up to 1920s. And it was evidently a vast collection that he had collected all over the hills of Laguna.
Oh, gosh. My guess would be the Bowers.
That was my only, at that time, that was the first and the only thing in this area.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Bowers, they started very California.
Yeah,
Their interest, their board of directors has gone like
right.
whole nother direction. They're not. They're actually looking to give all their archaeological stuff to the Cooper Center. There was talks between, and Cooper Center's like, great, they do all Orange County.
As long as it gets saved.
Yeah, we were happy to take it. It's kind of shocking that they are just so uninterested in it, and every time I go there, I beeline it to the early California
Yeah.
Native American thing, and I love it. But the direction it's going is the Cooper Center. Their goal is to do a museum.
My grandfather came in 1895, and he said that the hills of Temple Hills were covered with Indian artifacts.
Oh, the whole city.
He said the whole top.
Howard Wilson, I guess he collected a lot, and so Laguna Beach is kind of like this black hole. Orange County is kind of a black hole because there was so much collection, and I remember trying to contact Steve Turnbull because I went to school with his daughter. Like, hey, does your family have any of these artifacts still? And we just want to check them out. And he told me that they kind of got bequeathed to different family members, and I think the collection, or maybe he was like, I don't want to give it up. But all we want to do is take pictures and document it, and because I think Laguna Beach is so fascinating, but it just gets always trumped by.
Because his wife is Howard Wilson's daughter, as you probably know.
Yeah, so I was like,
Yeah.
does your dad have any of those artifacts? So I don't know. It was a weird, like, the beauty of Facebook. Like, hey, Kelly, it's Megan. Haven't talked to you since high school. But yeah, she told me that it was kind of given, But we want, like, one thing is to find more cogstones, see if we could find maybe someone has a Clovis point or, you never know. And that one cogstone sitting on some guy's garage, just unreal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, are you Karen's daughter?
Karen? No.
No?
No.
What's your relationship to Howard then?
Oh, I'm not. No, we just have the same last name.
Oh, okay.
I wish.
Because
No.
when I was doing my work at Fullerton too, Howard gave me part of his collection.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
If you ever want to take a picture, send it to the Cooper Center. I don't work there anymore, but my heart is at the Cooper Center. I sold my soul for contract archaeology.
And when you talk about the Bowers, it was interesting when Joan and the whole company were building their houses down there at Abalone Point. There's a guy in town here named Mike Francis. Mm-hmm. And Mike was a contractor on big rig and also on a shovel. And he called me over there one day, and you couldn't believe the artifacts they found from Abalone Point all the way around to the cove up there. And everybody was picking up stuff, and then all of a sudden someone goes, this is in the 60s.
Oh, yeah, it's
And
before.
someone just goes, well, it's better than they picked it up than, because all they were doing were destroying it.
Yeah. Well, and
Okay.
according to Turnbull's blog, that the guys who were excavating the Laguna woman were taking the bones and just grinding it up with whatever else they were grinding up. And
Well, that's what Howard told me.
yeah. Well, there's nothing. Get the artifacts, preserve it, but when it loses its what we call provenience, where it came from, that's what's tough. But if there's people who can remember, like, oh yeah, this came from here, it gives you a better idea, and you piece it together with the recorded sites. But yeah, before those, environmental laws, it's kind of lost. Even Winterbourne, with the best intentions of the WPA, excavated it, and then it just through time, like, where'd that collection go? I think there's one really beautiful steatite bowl that had little holes for shell decorations. That's still, the Bowers still has it. But the things they describe, it had house pit floor,
Right. And the artifacts that I have were given to me by the guys that were drovers out here in the Irvine Ranch in the 50s and early
Yeah.
60s, before, they had the ranch house at El Toro, and then the one that was out further. Mm-hmm. And then Howard actually took me on top of the world, in between the road that runs from on the south side to the top of the world side. He took me down below, and there's a hot springs there.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that.
It's not there anymore, but at the time, that's when the Moulton Ranch was still there. And that's when the Irvine Company was running their cattle across El Toro, and up El Toro, and then into the Moulton Ranch area.
Because if you think of the view from like Alta Laguna Park, you see right down into that canyon. So that would be so strategic if, you don't want people taking your resources, because Laguna Beach, the rocky coast, you go north, you go south, it's just flat. the shell and the abalone and just the kelp and the resources here were so rich. You want to like protect it. So, you know, if you're sitting up there, you can see anybody coming down and you have a good view of it. And yeah, there'd be the ridge lines and the coastal bluffs are always choice spots for
And there's still a spring at Treasure Island. I was there last week.
a Treasure Island.
Yeah, it's right on the beach.
Oh,
It's still
man.
there. It's been there. My grandparents told me about it. And all you do is dig down in the sand, and it's right there on the
Oh,
other
the
side.
Treasure Island.
This side of this
My
side
godparents
of
had a
Island.
trailer there, and I'll never go to the Montage, and I wound up working there in college and quitting 6 months later because it was horrible. Beautiful place, but not for me. I'd rather deliver pizzas than work there.
You mentioned the Archaeological Society. in
Pacific
Orange-
Coast Archaeological.
Yeah, they're still going, huh?
Oh, they're still going. They're awesome. I love the PCAS. They're every Thursday, Irvine Ranch, Water District, right off Waterworks, St. Candian, I think. 7:30. You can it's free to go to the meetings. You can become a member. You can have dinner with the speaker before. They're really great. And like I said, they publish Orange County stuff. My whole thesis was a lot of PCAS articles. But yeah, I recommend if you guys are into it.
I got one more question here. You mentioned amino acid rasmization.
Yeah.
You know, I use that dating process with carbon dating in a burial I have found in the canyon here. Okay? And it was a double dip.
Yeah.
And did you have Beta and Masters do it down there at Scripps?
Well, I didn't do the dating myself, and all the dates from the Laguna Woman is from UCLA. Both dates were from UCLA, so.
Okay.
What's your archaeologist?
Yeah.
What's your name, last name?
Corky Smith.
Corky Smith.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of times looking through.
Got the same degree you did out of Fullerton.
C. Smith, did a lot of site records. Did you fill out the site records?
Yeah, or a 370.
370. Oh, that's Laguna. Isn't that the one
Right.
in Aliso Creek?
No,
Is it the golf course?
no, it's at Dilly's.
Oh,
Rock Shelter. Nobody knows about it.
I love the rock shelters.
I know.
Those are good
This
ones.
is a good one.
Yeah,
In
even
fact,
the
there's
toll
two of them
road. The
there.
toll road did a lot of sites
Yeah.
came from the toll road. A lot of cool rock shelter. Even a whole paleo museum collection.
Yeah, the date of the burial there was 1800 plus or minus 2. And the same with the midden.
Oh, cool. That's good
So
to know.
it's it was a good one. I was really lucky.
I know. Now it's all monitoring. the
No,
fun
I
stuff.
did it the right way. You know,
Yeah.
it took
No,
me,
I'm just saying that there's not very many cool sites.
right.
And then if
Right.
they are cool, you have to not let the client know how cool it is.
And there's a rock shelter that's right next to it that's never been excavated too. So maybe someday you go out there and get a crew to go out there.
Oh, I got my eye on Laguna Lake. That's my bubbles. I wanna
Well,
go
thanks
there.
for your lecture. Really appreciate it a
Oh,
lot.
well, thank you.
Glenna, you're up.
I just wanted to make sure that I understand the, I don't know, not exactly the geography of the Indians in this region. Here in Laguna, it was the Hachiman.
Well, the Aliso Creek, so it's totally arbitrary. But the
Okay,
Aliso
south
Creek,
of Aliso Creek, it's Hachiman, north, it's Tongva.
yeah, but that's, again, very arbitrary. And there's some discussion that if the Santa Ana River was the real kind of marker. But if you just think of the topography of Laguna, it's so unique. It's, basically south of Doheny, you go on those long tracts of sand, and that's a totally different, it's a similar, but it's a different settlement subsistence pattern. And then LA, it's totally flat. So Laguna really is just unique. The cliffs come right up above, so it's there's very few spots where it's nice and flat. You have Laguna Lake, which must have been such a huge resource, but it makes sense to me, and I think that it was probably occupied by a group of people that were probably very territorial.
So my next question is, the people, whether they be north or south of Aliso Creek, were they then, when they were recruited or coerced, whatever language you want to,
Yeah.
by the Padres, did they wind up at San Juan Capistrano, or did any of them wind up, you mentioned Luiseño, Did any of them wind up in Mission San Luis Rey?
Oh, yeah, so that would be the Luiseno, and that's, yeah, the Luiseno, and they even have a different term, but,
But one reason I'm so interested I mean, growing up in Laguna, I went to San Juan Capistrano a lot, but now there's a lot of historical scholarship about Mission San Luis Rey, because there was, do you know the work of Beth Haas?
I don't.
Well, she published a book about a year ago called Saints and Citizens, in which she argued that in Mission San Luis Rey, there's Indian artists flourished, so that it wasn't merely a site of oppression, but also of Indian creativity.
Well, there's Pablo Talk, who's another.
Right. She had published an earlier book about
Pablo
Talk.
Talk was, he was kind of handpicked by the Padres, and they took him to Europe, and he ultimately died there. But yeah, he wrote, I was even going to put a cool drawing, but he was his own ethnographer, and he wrote a lot about his perspective on Luiseno traditions. And yeah, I would say San Luis Rey probably had a different approach. I definitely know San Juan and San Gabriel were pretty, we'll just
More
say they
repressive.
did a good job at what the missions were supposed to do.
Yeah. Well, since I'm so fascinated now by finding out about San Luis Rey, I just was curious if any of the folks from here were there, because that's a cool.
Yeah, well,
connection to me.
there's even there's a story, I can't remember if it was Pablo Talk or if it was from Boscana, but San Luis Rey and the Juaneño or Hashiman, they would play a game similar like Mesoamerican like ball, and it got real heated, and they got into it, and they got in a big fight. You can just imagine like Angels versus Dodgers, and but yeah, he recorded. I think it was Pablo Talk who talked about some sort of game that they had, and it was really heated, and they went back, and it was a rivalry, but. Yeah, when Juaneño and Luiseno, that was very much the same group. The Tongva, they spoke mutually intelligible languages, but they could communicate, and they did, and probably intermarried, and then you talk about the Cahuilla and all that. It's all very interesting. I could go on.
Well, Megan, thank you so much. I learned a lot, and join Megan and I tomorrow on St. Anne's in PCH with a shovel. We're going to start digging down to find another skull. I'm sure it's under there somewhere. So thank you for giving up your evening and being with us tonight. Don't forget membership, donations, newsletter, website, Facebook, theater. See you guys next month. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you.
Nothing.